Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight in person and virtually. In person, we're still missing a few guests, but I'm sure they'll trickle in as the evening goes on. So, to begin, we would like to do a land acknowledgement. We honor the original people, the Ottawa, the Chippewa, also known as the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi. We acknowledge that we gather in Grand Rapids on the traditional land of the original people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We acknowledge and recognize that when we host activities, these events take place on stolen land. We are the Free Peoples. We are a 501c4 nonprofit political organization. Tonight, we are here for a teach-in. Teach-ins began in Michigan in the 1960s. It was a way to protest the Vietnam War. After that, it began to explode everywhere. If you go back into your memory, you'll have pictures of Malcolm and Martin with their community at their feet to learn. Well, that's where the idea of the teach-in came. So, let's get started. To start us off, we have a musical performance by 616 Records. So Teelan, FYI, also known as Teelan, Teelan is the founder and leader of 616 Records. He created 616 Records after seeing so much division within his hometown, Grand Rapids, the music scene. In hopes to bring unity, he created 616 Records. Teelan has been described as having an enormously generous heart and an extreme passion for music. He often says that music is what runs through his veins. Teelan was brought up on the likes of Tupac, Lauryn Hill, and Jay-Z. He was eventually drawn to the amazing lyrics, such as folks as J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar. Teelan just released the project, the Teelan EP, and has more to come. Please help me welcome Teelan.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Thank you. So I'm not actually going to start. I'm actually going to have my label mate, Shane Edwards, start. I'll be going after him. Can you guys give him a warm welcome applause?
How are you doing? I just want to say thank you for having me. I go by Shane Edwards, and I am part of 616. Xander Taylor, my team. Just dropped a as well. It's called Black Heart on social media. I go by Shane Edwards 616. The nights when it's getting real calm. Can't get you off my mind and it's strong. My heart won't when I see you when you call. You ain't never up for me, no. How can you live around me, baby? You think I'm driving me crazy. I just wanna see you ignore it. You still got me losing my focus. You got me running away with your lady. I know you heard me, oh, baby. How can I bring around, baby? How can you bring it down for me, baby? Brought out the best of me, just bring with you, make me go more. I thought I gave you the best of my love. Before I go, you know, I gave you the best of my love. Before I go, you know, I gave you the best of my love. Before I go, you know, I gave you the best of my love. Before I go, you know, I gave you the best of my love. Sunsets and moonrise of you keep up the night, wondering if I come across your mind. Triggered by the way they look at you, and you fall for the attention they give you. And I can't describe the pain that's left in me, because I've let go of the memories I have of you. Holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. I'm holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. Holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. I'm holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. Holding on to the things that you put me through. Thinking about ways to get back to you. But just know that I could try to hurt you. Struggling to accept that there's no me and you. Holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. I'm holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. Holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. I'm holding on to the love you gave me, the love you gave me. Holding on to. I'm talking about Shade Edwards. I want to thank you for having me.
You gave me. Yeah, give it up again. I'm private now when they sent the song to me. I was like, oh yes, yes. So this month we are examining the legacy of slavery. I'm a Black woman, and so I believe that we have a lot of stories to be told. And so the acts that you'll see coming up tonight represent Black America. So, moving on, the the first teacher of the evening was given to me by my personal mentor, by Mitch. And he says, I know a lawyer who can teach about the 13th Amendment. And I was like, yes, that's what we're doing here. So practitioner Carrie Love is an attorney at law. He practiced in Chicago, Illinois through 2006 and currently practices in West Olive, Michigan. Carrie Love limits his practice to personal injury, business, civil and constitutional rights, and disability rights, July 1989 to present. Carrie Love has published articles related to the historical development of the Bill of Rights, the war on drugs as a war on the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Patriot Act, and other recent actions in the war on terror, and the disturbing civil rights and human rights implications of dissent. He's also been an adjunct professor of constitutional law in various colleges and universities. I've also had the pleasure of having lunch with Carrie Love, and I can't wait for him to get up and teach us. Please help me welcome Carrie Love.
Here comes the boring part. I even wrote it all down. First of all, before I say anything, I want to hear a round of applause for Kareem and Susie. She's reading from my curriculum vitae. That's all the past. She's the future. And I'm very serious. I gave up about 5, 6 years ago practicing law primarily because it seemed hopeless. Because I would go in front of juries who did not know anything that they needed to know to exercise informed judgment. So it's really nice to see young people that are out here, that are learning, that are using teachers. I was actually around when they did the original teachers. I hate to tell you how old I am. I'd also like to recognize Rich Kale and his lovely wife, Holly. I'm not blaming them, they're the reason I'm here, but they're the ones that are allegedly tarred and feathered with some other operatives, So that's the kind of law that I do. I represent accused criminals like these horrible people. I was told I get to talk about slavery, and it's kind of a depressing subject, but on the other hand, the reality of life is it's a very important one for America. Now, I'm an old white guy, so give me some space here. Back in the old days, prior to the 1700s, everybody in the world was a slave. If you were a king or an emperor or a shah or a czar, you were basically a slave. I mean, Peter the First, the Great, they call him, of Russia, sent 200,000 serfs to build St. Petersburg. Many of them died, but he was in control of their lives from the cradle to the grave, and he could do that. So, with all due respect to people that don't agree with me, in 1776, a great idea first burst forth in America, which was that we all have inalienable rights that come from the Creator. Now, Mitch doesn't subscribe to the Creator view in terms of religion. I, however, think there must be something out there before the Big Bang, and I'm still looking for it. But the reality of life is this gives us, as Americans, a very strong foot up. Because the genius of America was no one could be a slave. Now, they fell down on that when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, which I consider the first constitution of America. There was no America. Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence. We all know he's got some skeletons in his closet. But if you read the original that Jefferson wrote, it condemned the slave trade of George III. And of course, slavery was going on all around the world. It wasn't just England. But George was a king of England, by the way, the guy we rebelled against. He was charging 10% of the profits from the slave trade went right in his pocket. There was no way he was giving that up. By the way, these are the people we watch on TV and all these movies these days. It makes me cute. Nobody should watch any of these movies about these people. We should not worship royalty. They are the enemy of the people.
That's right.
Sorry, that's my opinion. I'm sticking by it. What else do I want to talk about? Okay. The rebellion against slavery in America actually predated the Declaration of Independence. The 1774, the state of Rhode Island, which was just a colony then, passed a law making slavery illegal in the state of Rhode Island. And there were hundreds of these laws passed around the world, including in the colonies, opposing slavery. But in my view, the real pact with the devil in America was when the Constitution was adopted. What we call the Constitution now. We had the Declaration of Independence, that was the first one, then we had the Articles of Confederation, that was the second one, and then we had the Constitution of 1787. That's actually the third one. You think by the third time you might get it right. Okay? So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal with certain inalienable rights, which means you can't give them away, you can't sell them if you want to, that come from the Creator. But they kind of disappear with respect to women and black people and people of color generally. So Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, he condemns this, and Ben Franklin, and John Adams are the two other members of the committee, and they tell him, Tom, nobody's going along with this. If we want the South to join the revolution, we have to play low ball. We have to play real politics on the slavery issue. This is going to be a big problem. They will not join the rebellion we need them. So they took that out. 1787, which was when the Constitution was adopted, they had another problem. And the problem was, again, the South was not going to join the Constitution if slavery was not somehow allowed to continue. That's why I'm saying we make a pact with the devil. You guys know what the 3/5 clause is in the Constitution? Okay, the 3/5 clause is a real problem, because what that did was, it counted people of color, blacks, that were enslaved in the South as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation in the House of Representatives. They had no vote, they had no participation, but their masters got more votes and more representatives in Congress because of their slaves. So this basically legitimized and made a power move for the people that owned slaves to continue. It also influenced the number of electors. People don't pay attention to electors, but in the last election, people started getting into this. The electors are the guys who actually elect the president. Your vote doesn't count.
Right, say this,
Sorry,
say
I mean, you guys vote for the electors, and then the electors elect the president. And because of the 3/5 rule in the Constitution, slave owners got more electors for presidents than their counterparts who didn't own slaves. So this is the pact with the devil, because it denied the fundamental genius of the Declaration of Independence in America, in its laws. And that's what the fight against slavery, in my opinion, has been about ever since. So where was I? Oh, yeah. The history that I just given you, although important, is the history of the top. What was going on at the top by the people in power that were writing the laws. Let's not forget that by the time the Constitution was adopted in 1787, there was a long history of slave rebellions all around the world. You guys ever heard of Spartacus? Anybody heard of Spartacus? Ah, good, okay. Spartacus was a slave. He was a gladiator during the time of Julius Caesar, which is right before the time of Jesus of Nazareth, a long time ago. And we remember Spartacus because he led a slave rebellion that kicked the crap out of the Roman Empire for 5 years. He defeated them in almost every battle he fought against them. Why? Because nobody wants to be a slave. So the handwriting was already on the wall at the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Slavery was going out the window. So when America was founded and adopted this anti-slavery attitude, it was on the right path in history. It got derailed with the Constitution and the real politics that required making a pact with the devil. Anyway, I'm sure you guys all know Nat Turner, right? Nat Turner, the slave rebellion of 1831. I mean, take a look at this guy. This guy was owned by a guy named Samuel Turner, and he was one of the worst slave owners known. He prohibited any of the slaves from learning how to read. He prohibited them from having any knowledge. Why? Because people that know things, people that come to these seminars, that come to teachings and learn the truth, are not going to just roll over and play dead. They're going to stand up for themselves. Nat Turner taught himself how to read. I mean, the guy had to be a genius. Have you ever tried to teach yourself how to read? Go try to teach yourself how to read Russian. It's not easy. This guy taught himself how to read, and he was so good at it, he was so brilliant. The only book he could get was the Bible. Okay? So what did he do? He starts preaching the Bible, and it turns out he's an incredibly good preacher. And he's going around preaching the Bible to all these other slaves of other different plantations. And his owner finds out he's making money off of it. So what does he do? He says, oh yeah, you can keep doing it, but I get my cut, which was basically 90%. So the reality of life is, Nat Turner was a genius.
I'm inspired because of the genius. There's no way you can be grown up for 5 years when you're outnumbered. Professional soldiers against people that just point the field and everything without being genius. So, genius has something to do with childhood, from nature to slavery. Why? Because genius comes from the very young. You cannot pick who's going to be a genius. The geniuses are creative. I agree, yeah. Take a look at one of the guys that I love to hate. Adolf Hitler. Right? Adolf Hitler had the second really super race. And one of the reasons that was subservient to the super race were the Jews. And the Jews, he hated with passion through this Jew that caused Germany to World War I. So what did he do? He sent right to World War II. And he kicks all the Jewish scientists out of Germany. The large number of those German scientists went to America. They went to Australia. They went to England. And they developed what they called the atomic bomb. The master race in Germany did not create the atomic bomb. But the subservient, the second-class race did. And they kicked it to death. Because they had brains and they had genius. I have no better lesson we need to figure out that these guys come up with this idea of white supremacy, or others that black supremacy or brown or yellow are crazy people. There's only one race, it's the human race, and the way you can prove that is when you all interbreed. And so, this is a clean record, right? And love and opinion, peace in your community, that's how you produce genius. And that's what's necessary for the survival of the species. So, I think if I put out the hands, I had 2 dogs. And all these things, you have to do, you gotta have a son. And I have a son. And he said, because they can't do. And I was completely upset about this. And I was saying to this, that's over. I said, my daughter's can do anything for a son. I just had a son. He's great, I'm not saying. I said, Dad, imagine that the set up people like you in charge for the last 5,000 years, and most of the people like you in charge. And we educated everyone, and we gave everyone a chance. 50% or more of all the geniuses of humanity have been repressed by people like you. That's just not the method. That's not counting everybody else that's never been genius. And you're a sure cancer by now. But everybody else you're saying is COVID-19. We're going to beat all this into the ground. But it's sad, stupid people who are presidents, and they no basis for what they were saying, and they're doing wrong time and time again. Enforce these unjust, unfair laws. The one reason only they had made a mistake, and we made it back with the devil. So I'd like to recognize the people who are, I'm sure, first learned about the movie Hidden Figures. Harry Jackson, Kevin Johnson, and Dorothy Vaughan. I mean, these were mathematical geniuses who were all black, and they were all women, and they were all connected to the education side. They had one. There was someone who recognized, I really was, but Mary Johnson's teacher when she was only 4th grade, teaching her math said, you know, I went to college, and she had already beyond my ability in mathematics in 4th grade. And they pushed her on, they got an education, and they were people before there were computers, they were called computers, that were American movement. Okay, so just imagine if we had all those opportunities for all the people that were required. We would be so much farther than this makes me. Yeah, I'm thinking the worst form of slavery is ignorance. And we need to educate, and we need to spread knowledge, and we need to all get rid of ignorance. And that's what I think we as a other people like you. So, getting to the 13th Amendment, which is what I was supposed to talk about, say it again, the 13th Amendment was adopted after the Civil War. And it irritates me. It irritates me to extremity when I hear people talking about the Confederacy in states like South Massachusetts or where I defend almost anybody who runs under the Bill of Rights. Okay? But I'm starting to give up on some people, especially the states' rights people, which is really what we call white supremacists. And why is it? If you go back, and I do this, this is how I waste my time. You go back and you read declarations of independence of the seceding states. You can go read these, they exist, they wrote it. They claim that they were seceding from the Union, which I believe you have a right to do. I think you have a right to secede from your government. That's what the Declaration of Independence was about. But you can't do that if you don't allow all the people to vote. Only about 20% of the people in the South at the time of secession were white slave owners, or were white people, and the rest were slaves. If they want to claim that their behavior was consistent with the Declaration of Independence, where was the vote of the black slaves? Without that, it's a wholly illegitimate action. Just like the January 6th riot in D.C. was wholly illegitimate. The same thing the Confederates were doing. We're going to force this down your throat by force of violence. It's antithetical to everything the rule of law and the Constitution and things that I think you're saying. So, the 13th Amendment was, one of the guys that was a spearhead for this was a guy named Thaddeus Stevens. There's a bunch of them that, you know how laws are made. I mean, you guys watch C-SPAN and see the making of the sausage and all that. It's not pretty. But these guys had to husband the 13th Amendment through the Congress at a time the Civil War was just over. There's a lot of bad feeling, there was a lot of hurt feeling, there were a lot of people that weren't happy with this. You should read the speeches these people made on the floor of the Congress. It's pretty sad when you compare it to what quality of statesmanship you see today from the representative I won't name from the state of Georgia. But Thaddeus Stevens gave a speech. He said, I want to make sure that this amendment not only gets rid of slavery as we knew it in the South, in the United States, but it's going to eradicate the entire history of slavery, whether it occurred in the South or it occurred under English law, because a lot of our laws are derived from English law. After we had the Revolution, we adopted a lot of the English laws as American laws. He wanted to make sure that tradition did not continue. But more importantly, he said, I want to make sure that even the Roman laws of slavery were abolished. Because the Roman laws were first, English laws were based on that, and American laws were based on both. And this is a critical point, because under the Roman law of slavery, the father could sell his family into slavery. So in America today, the 13th Amendment not only protects all of us from being enslaved by other people outside of our family, but parents are not the masters of their children without intervention by the law. Why is this important? This is important because there's a lot of people out there talking about the fact that our freedom is being taken away because we're going to have mask mandates in the schools. I got news for you, folks. There's a long history of law that says no. When it comes to protecting the children, the law can protect the children even from their parents. Parents have no right, because of the 13th Amendment, to make martyrs of their children. And the children are the future. So we as a community have to join together and say, no, we're not listening to this inane argument, that somehow this is freedom. This is slavery. You're treating your children just like the masters treated their slaves in the South. You think that you can create a situation in which their health is in danger. That happened all the time on plantations in the South.
masters routinely had their slaves reproduce and then sell their children down the road. So this concept of the 13th Amendment, which is, by the way, only 47 words long, what the 13th Amendment did is it fulfilled the genius of America's Declaration of Independence. It abolished any form of slavery, any form of involuntary servitude, not only based on American law, but all the way back to Roman law. So to finish up, what I want to tell you is, the reality of life is the 13th Amendment is here to establish freedom for all. And that means freedom under law, and we need to know the history, we need to know the law, we need to know the science, because in order for there to be government of the people, by the people, and for the people, you have to have an informed people. And that's why these types of meetings are so important. So I salute you, so give yourself a round of applause, and I'll get out of here.
Great job, Carrie. Thank you so much. Give it up for Carrie again. To tell you that this is not your great novice teaching, so it takes the teachers and the performers to be unapologetic about their words tonight. You may have to cut your pearls every once in a while. Get out your tickets. The beautiful art was donated by Jessica Miller. Winner 893059. Right, up next, we have a musical performance by Shin Koo Young. If you've been with us, I believe this is like our sixth teaching. Shin Koo Young has been with us since Pride Month, and we have been asking him to come back to the stage over and over again. He's a whole mood. I absolutely love him. He was adopted from South Korea. Shin Koo Young has dedicated his career as an Asian American self-funded independent artist to create inclusive music for the LGBTQ plus community. As an up-and-coming artist in the Grand Rapids, Michigan community, he strives to promote change and growth with his original trailblazing tunes and inspiring persona in the local pop music scene. You can find Shin Koo Young's music in popular streaming platforms such as Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes, Google Play, and you can watch him on YouTube, which we always link on our page. Give it up for Shin Koo Young.
Yeah, so, Karina and Nikki, and now they invite me back to during this thing. Thank you so much. Really quick before I start singing, I'm not doing the original song. I will be doing a song, my American Idol audition. And I got news yesterday, I didn't make it through to the final phase. But I think that a little bit we're talking about like slavery and like just diversity and stuff like that. Being an independent artist, you feel like you can be yourself and make content and you have full creative control, but you're at the hands of the people. Because if people don't listen to your stuff, then why do you keep creating? People don't tune in or tap in or share or even just engage in a beautiful comment. It's kind of like, what am I doing? And after doing this for many, many years, I mean, I'm not that old, but I've been here for a long time. I discovered that whether or not people engage, there will be a time for you. And my time isn't being with American Idol yet, but it is being here tonight. So, just take some time.
Machine gun, fine line.
whole mood, right? The whole mood, give it up for Shanny Moon, y'all. We have a slight schedule change. We are going to welcome up to the stage next, possibly your commissioner. We have Kent County Commissioner Robert S. Womack here to educate the community. Help me welcome Robert S. Womack.
Hello, everyone. Now, I'll tell you this, I don't usually use crib notes, that we couldn't use those in school, but now you can Google in school. So the really important reason I did this is when I was asked to talk about slavery, without a few notes, I could be here all day. Anyone who really knows, and when I say know about slavery, it takes a lifetime to totally understand it. But if you even know this much about it, you know, just to give people the basic concept, we would be here for years. So I just got a few important notes that I wanted to cover. First of all, when it comes to 1619, it's an important time to remember. Some people say that was the beginning of slavery because 20 slaves or more were taken from a ship, kind of stolen. The people were already stolen into slavery, then they were stolen by another ship and brought to America to the 13 colonies. So we're talking 1619. A very important thing to understand is that the first slave rebellion was in the early 1500s here in America on a colonial soil. So when we started 1619, that's fine because it's become a historical moment, but it robs us of the fact that African Americans were already helping build America before 1619. It also erases the fact that some people of color, not only our Indian brothers and sisters were here, there were Africans here. There were Folsom people who had walked during the Ice Age when the land was connected, had walked to America. So when I talk about 1619, the importance is to remember that we cannot forget people of color pre-existed. We also, when we look at 1619, and you think of the Declaration of Independence coming, what, 1776, 100 years later or more, it gives you the impression that the colonizers had already established something in America. They were still fighting for the United States of America that you know today. Some people don't like that because I know I'm patriotic. Yeah, I live in America. You know, I don't bad mouth America too much because you got the choice to leave, more people coming than leaving. But it's true that in 1619, they had not got their freedom from Britain. If they want to use that word, as a lot of people use that word and don't know what it really means to lose your freedom. But it takes away that our Indian brothers and sisters who were occupying this country, this was their country at that time. So 1619 also takes away the study of the Asiatic man, the first person on the planet of Earth, National Geographic, that said those bones belong to Africans, to black people, to people of color. So it's very important to know that our children can't be totally educated scientifically, historically, geographically, if we just continue to start at 1776, 1619. When you were coming up in the 50s, some of you the 50s and 40s, I'm old too, I was coming up in the 80s. You could get away with having such a small purview, a history. But now we're in a global economy. Now our children have to know history because now they're talking to people who don't have a small piece of history that we have. Let's move on I talked about 1619. Let's move on to critical race theory. I gotta take a little walk. Anyone know me? My name is Robert S. I'm from Lafayette and Highland in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm very thankful to God that as blunt as I am and as real as I am and speaking in the only language that I know, that my district can understand, God has still allowed me to achieve some success in this political world where you're supposed to be politically correct. So excuse me for some of the language I'm going to use. Some fools in Lansing are fighting to get rid of critical race theory. And I call them fools because there is no critical race theory in schools. It's a distraction. It's meant to set us back. It's meant to take the history that we do have, the slight history we do have in our schools, and try to chip back at that, but give it this controversial name. This is critical race theory. Let me tell you what I would think critical race theory would include. First of all, they don't talk about the melanin in our skin that protects us from cancer in the sun. They don't talk about that in school. I didn't learn that in Grand Rapids Public School. I spent money at NYU. I spent money at GRCC. Now, I love these colleges. Don't get me wrong. So what I paid to learn, I learned. Let's give it up for GRCC. I don't want to say anything bad about our college kids. Our young people, just like the guy who was up here said, youth in revolt. I love that. Because sometimes we have to revolt. A lot of times we got to revolt against the powers that be. But we also have to revolt against the misinformation that comes from the powers that be, because that's how they learned to enslave us mentally when they were finally forced to take the chains off our hands, they wrapped it around our brain and try to make us self-destruct. So we have to revolt in many ways. But critical race thing, we don't talk about the melanin. We don't talk about chattel slavery in school. When people say, well, everybody was a slave. You saw some boxing fights, right? You've seen some violence in your life. Now, I've seen some fights, but every fight ain't the same fight. All the fights we saw in school, me and my friends only talk about 3. Wow, that really didn't turn out. Yeah, that's when I learned to be peaceful. I learned I couldn't beat everybody, even if some, and that guy was only this big. You know, so when you talk about slavery, we're talking about chattel slavery. We're talking about critical race theory. No one told me in school that Nat Turner's skin was sold, that his bones was turned into trophies, that some people wanted the burnt parts to be used for grease on their food. We didn't learn that. We so much had no critical race theory that when we saw groups, and I want to apologize to some people in here in case it was your grandparents or great-grandparents that were driving down the street, and they're white doesn't mean they're racist, doesn't mean they're prejudiced, but we were kids, and when we watched Roots, we went to South High School, and I don't know, we didn't talk about it. I just saw us picking up rocks. People picking up rocks, so I picked up some rocks. We were mad till we saw Roots. And we went in there and said, they whooped Kuna Kinte. They whipped them. They used to whip our people. We didn't learn that so graphically in school. So we're doing rocks. Can you imagine? CBS was not going to let Alex Haley show our people being burnt. They were not going to let us see terrorism in America. They were not going to let us see a woman get pulled and her pregnant baby fall. They were not going to let us see us get lynched or thrown into the burning sugarcane fire, or the ears that were cut off and nailed to wood to remind people things. We weren't going to see that. And that violence isn't critical race theory. That just shows you how much has been hid. And they don't think America can take the truth. But this generation got that phone, so the truth ain't dependent on the school curriculum no more. So when they see these kids in revolt, You gotta talk to these kids. You gotta respect them. And you can't play them like you played my generation. You gotta get real now and get going. Yeah, they can get information. They're not dependent on the little book we would have in school and carry. They're not dependent on that. They got world history. So critical race theory, they don't talk about women's lib. They don't talk about the Christian, let's say spiritual, because there's so many religions, and I don't believe in religion gangbanging, but spiritual white women who said you shouldn't be doing people the way you're doing. You shouldn't be treating people like that. There shouldn't be slavery. There shouldn't be splitting up families. When those white ladies went to tell their version at these town hall meetings, rich white men told the poor white men, you don't own property, so you got nothing to say. And they told the women, you don't have no voice. And what's important about that, I always tell people in my community, what's important about that, all the issues, hundreds of years in America, and white women said, this was the issue we're going to speak about. This is the issue. This is our first time combining, going down to talk to the men about what's going on. And they kicked them out. Is there any women that know that part? And I don't want y'all to think I'm just up here making up. Has anybody read about that? That was one of the main issues that helped start. You read about that. That helped start women's lib. That is not just people of color being oppressed. People of color being held back. People of color going through these things. Critical race theory. What is racism? What is white supremacy? White supremacy is the belief by some that if you look at the first laws after, this law happens in about 1630, that blacks cannot marry whites. This happened in the 1600s. You can't marry, which shows you that human beings, when left alone from the government, the powers that be, love on each other. They love each other. They play baseball together. They play softball together. People of different colors fall in love with each other sometimes. And they live a beautiful life. But there was a law they couldn't get married because when you talk about racism, you're talking about people that believe the people of color have babies with white people. Those babies will come here with color. And if that continues, they believe the white race will be wiped out. So they believe we have to stop it by any means necessary. Many people that were lynched would also have their private parts cut off because a lot of the racists that were part of the Ku Klux Klan, and I hate to use the Ku Klux Klan because this terrorist group is very small compared to the sneaky people that are really racist. There were black women. We know the Tuskegee experiment. When they gave black men syphilis and they didn't work on it. So we're talking about racism here. We're talking about not only that, but black women. There's a suit that's just happening from a family from way in the 40s and 50s where the black lady went in for one surgery and they cut out her womb. This happened a lot to stop the productions of babies. And I'm going to leave it there because, like I said, we could be here all night. But you must remember that there is no critical race theory. They are fighting, making this up because they want you to forget about one thing they're really trying to do, and that's take the right to vote from a new generation that got political and got rid of some power that be power. I mean, everybody wants a little power. You got power over your children. But good parents love their children. Leaders eat last. Good parents don't walk out that door for themselves. You walk out that door to work for your children. A man with a family is not the same as a man that was a boy with no responsibility. Women walk out and do things for their children. A president should go out and do things for the people of the United States of America, not rich corporations, not himself, not special rich interest groups. But this generation stood up. Minorities stood up. People came out and voted in a fair election, the democracy, the reason I'm still here in America, because it is a democracy. And even though when they wrote it, they didn't include me. They didn't include these young men when they wrote the Constitution. But people like Dr. Martin Luther King reminded them, are you going to be a hypocrite? Wasn't that written for all men and all women? And that's why I'm still here fighting to make that a reality. But there are people who want to shake that democracy. Important issue, we can't let them take our right to vote away, because that's a power that we can't afford to lose. We can't leave our kids here in a country where they're at the beck and call of the rich dollar, and there's no way they can come together and say, we want to change course in America. I'm proud of the young people. Let's give it up for them. They helped us take that steering wheel. And I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. I'm not here to take one party over the other party. I'm here to say our youth got a voice, and they used it. As I get ready to close, like I said, I could talk about slavery all day, but there are a few points I thought that I would bring. I want to thank him for mentioning the 13th Amendment. I'm glad he said that, because it brought something to my mind that always reminds the young men in my community. Slavery is not done. You are free unless you commit a felony as written in the Constitution of the United States of America. So when I'm a commissioner and I have people come tell me, they're taking my freedom, they're taking it because of one issue. No matter where you stand on that issue, you got the right to wear a mask when you want to, not wear a mask. You got the right to feel that follow the scientific evidence that we will be safer until they get the cure out and everything we need for this pandemic with a mask on. But you also have the right to listen to people who might just say, there is no disease, even though over 500,000 people have died. Even though millions have died worldwide, there is no reason for concern. You got the right, but don't come to me and say they're taking your freedom. I've been in jail. I've been where it's like the song says, so low you can't go under it. So high you can't go over it. So wide and circular that you can't go around it. And as much as I hated losing my freedom, I had to lose my freedom to value my freedom. I had to lose a good woman in my life to learn how to treat a woman, to learn how important a woman is, to learn that, as the Bible said, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. I'm not, like I said, I'm from my family behind that I keep it real. I grew up in ignorance. I was surrounded by some ignorance. I did ignorant things. I said things. But I had to lose a woman to learn how precious. And then when you're somebody's man, your number one job is to protect her heart. That's your job. But I also had to go to jail to learn my freedom is one of the most precious, and not the most precious thing God has bestowed upon me. So when I hear people, and that's temporary in jail, still I'm not treated like a slave. We're talking about the freedom, total freedom, going. You don't have the freedom to marry her. And even if you marry her on this plantation, I'm going to come sleep with her tonight. And you might still be in the same room. Your kids might, no, you're going to go sleep with your daughter. You're talking about critical race theory? Have you ever heard that in school? Now, I'm not saying that we, every age is ready to totally understand, but when you go to college and you can't even get that information, when you're in the 12th grade, you can't get that information. But we do hear the information. I'm glad we do, because I want us to have respect for our veterans. So I'm glad we learn about the wars. And I'm glad we learned about the pillage and the loss of life in war. So we understand when we hear the word war, how important it is that we avoid this at all costs unless it's necessary. But when it comes to slavery, people don't understand. I'm probably at my last 2 minutes. Slavery is not done. Crime is going up. People wonder why. I'm not going to go into that. I will just tell you the subliminal messages, the things we hear on TV, from media to movies to music. Good news, bad news, real news, but we hear more things that inflame the youth. When you come out of 12th grade and you've been miseducated, you don't have a skill, you don't have a training place. I sat at a table with some rich people as I closed. And they said, Robert, what do you want? What do you mean what I want? I got what I want. I'm at the table being a voice of my community. And I'm giving important information back to my community that I would not have if I had not been elected. There were grants. African American historical record was anywhere from 3% to 12%. Being able to get that information onto our radio station increased it to 47%. I don't take all the credit. I do thank Kent County Commission and the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce, a promoter in my area, Mikey Buxton, being able to connect those dots. We were able to take it up to 47%. So that's what I want. No. Why don't you open a restaurant? Why don't you open a bar? Pick any building. We'll give you the money to get a liquor license. I said, no. What do you want? I want a training center. Lots of people go to college, but for some who might not want to go to college and might not want to go through all of that, I want to do a training center. That feel like a 747 with no gas. But those are some of the things I would like to see. I've hit everything that I really wanted to hit. I could go deeper into slavery, but I just hope that I welcome back, and each time I come back, I can keep you just a little bit. And as I leave this, as people talk about our youth, the raising of crime, and I want to leave the youth with this. It's real easy to forget about slavery. It's real easy to forget about our freedoms and the importance of it when we don't see people. The prisoners are hid behind the wall. We don't see people with muskets over their face, steel muskets. We don't see people with chains to their feet, crippled over from chain and bondage, but our mind. So I'll leave you with this poem. It's called The Perfect Murder. Here's the way you kill a man. Don't give him a milligram of respect. Neglect his history. Oliver North sent drugs down the Misty, back alley street. Teaches children to drink St. Ives, and if that don't kill them, poke fun at the ones that stand out. Give his woman a monthly handout like welfare. But take it back if she finds a husband. Why? They don't need love and commitment. Drop a shipment of eggs on dental equipment. Next, let them have sex open and freely 200 years after you give them syphilis and Tuskegee. Listen, brother, because I can go even further on how they commit the perfect murder. Thank you.
Wow, give it up again for Robert. So like the females, there are pens on your table, and the back of the program is blank so that you can take notes if you hear something that you want to look further into. By the way, if you didn't know, I am a teacher. I teach middle school. No, we do not teach critical race theory, but I do teach my children the truth. I do teach them that, for instance, when Columbus came, he was met by the Oromo people. There were people here, and I teach my students about the history of those people. And I also teach, for instance, why we had to do the desegregation. So not just that we were quote unquote desegregated, but the why, the history that led up to that. And if you are in Kent County, I just want to say how empowering is it to have a commissioner that speaks the truth. Give it up one more time for Robert Bennett. And lastly, before we introduce our next teacher, I wanted to give you some information. We, as a Free Peoples, help with voting. If you need an ID to vote, we can help you with that. If you need to get registered or check your registration status, we can help you with that as well. All right, up next, we have Shana Marie. Shana is passionate, she's resilient, and she's a lifelong learner. She is the leader of a podcast, she's the host of a podcast, Reaching, and the creator of Reaching Beyond Bias. Reaching Beyond Bias is a platform dedicated to dismantling information about the real issues that affect our community. Shana the bi-weekly podcast is dedicated to having raw, reliable dialogue about various diversity-related themes and issues. She will be teaching us about West Michigan Nights. Give it up for Shana.
So before, as they're getting set up, there are a couple cards on everybody's tables. So I created a QR link on the black note card, or business card. So if you want to scan that, the first link in there will actually give you a copy of my slides, which is a clickable PDF. So there's tons of like external resources and extra reading. So I'll get into all of that, but yeah. I got any jokes?
Give it up for Shana.
Definitely guide the speech, so just gonna give them a second to get all situated. Should we dim the lights back here?
Would anyone like a cup of coffee? You just put your hand up and we'll bring you a cup. 1, 2.
Well, I'll just keep y'all entertained for a minute while he's getting set up. I just want to say, first of all, shout out to the Free Peoples. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to just be in community with all of these people trying to learn, trying to better our community. Obviously, we have a whole grocery list of issues to face here in West Michigan. So it's really great to just see a bunch of diverse faces coming together to create some innovative solutions. Yeah. Also, shout out to our performers and our speakers who have already gone. I am a huge fan of 616 Records. These young men are so incredibly talented, motivated, and they really impressed me the first time I met them, just with their spirit and just their drive to be better for the music. So I'm really happy to see you all here tonight. Okay, well, he's probably back there, but incredible seeing you perform today, guys. All right, we good to go? Okay, so like I said, if you don't want to follow along on your phones, you can, or definitely make sure to just scan it and refer back to it later if there's anything that you want to hear. So I'm here to teach y'all a little something about West Michigan. Nice. So again, I already mentioned the clickable PDF. So definitely pay attention to like the pictures, the underlying text, that's where you're gonna find external links to just more information. Before we begin, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So as Karina mentioned, one more slide. So as Karina mentioned, I'm the founder of Reaching Beyond Bias. This project has evolved into a podcast called Reaching. My co-host Mariah actually is right there. Shout out to Mariah, she is my ride or die. So definitely scan our barcode, that's also on your table, there's a business card there. Stay connected with us, we are really interested in getting some interviews out this season, so hit me up if you want to do a podcast. All right, next slide, please. So like, WTF is West Michiganites anyways? Well, I'm about to tell you. So I'll start with my first experience of racism here in West Michigan. So I've grown up in West Michigan my whole entire life. This experience happened when I was about 6 years old, attending Zeeland Public Schools. Every single girl in my first grade classroom got invited to this girl's birthday party, except for me. And the reason that she gave me was because her father said that it was disgusting that my mom would be married to a black man. And the crazy thing about this experience is that girl, like, she did not say this with any malicious intent. She said it pretty nonchalantly, quite matter of fact, you know, as if there wasn't really anything weird about what she was saying. But for me, this obviously became a very pivotal moment and a big foundation of why I am the person I am and why I do the work that I do. So West Michigan has always been and still is plagued by racism. Now, although this plague has been severely downplayed throughout history and overlooked, I think it's time for West Michigan to assume its proper place in the conversation about racism in America. If we choose to remain compliant and we choose to collectively put on our blinders, we will never fully address the unconscious and the conscious racism that continues to create and sustain inequities here in Grand Rapids.
That's right.
Next slide, please. So the irony of West Michigan nice is that depending on who you ask, this community is not nice at all. Some of you may not understand this experience or what I'm saying, but let's take a look, shall we? Next slide, please. Okay. So from post-slavery well into our modern day community, we remain segregated. Why is that? Well, racialized violence and state-sponsored discrimination at every turn. I remember learning back in grade school about the Great Migration, where Black Americans were escaping the perils of slavery and Jim Crow, and they envisioned this free land opportunity and equity up here in the north, right? But when they got here, and if you look at the historical records of the experiences of these people who migrated, they were met with racial violence and nearly the same exact treatment that they were enduring in the South. So this idea that we were force-fed in school here in West Michigan, that the North was supposed to be this progressive, safe haven for Blacks after the Civil War is completely false. Okay, so this book right here is a very chilling testimony of this truth. It's called Sundown Towns. I highly recommend that you read it if you have not. If you're using the clickable PDF, there is a link that will actually take you where you can buy the book. If you buy the book from that link, you'll actually be supporting the Reaching Beyond Bias platform, so thanks in advance. But yeah, so here are just a few West Michigan cities that have been identified through research as sundown towns, where it was literally illegal for Black people to be present in these communities after dark.
Wow.
And these communities are stained with violent legacies of enforcing these policies when it was illegal and when it was legal and illegal to do these things. So this right here is the foundation for why we are still so segregated. Next slide, please. So can anybody guess where this picture was taken? Sure the is. Yes, that is Grand Rapids, Michigan. So 1925, the KKK held a massive parade in our downtown streets. So again, we were taught that the KKK was a Southern issue, right? I remember learning this in school. But we have to reckon with the historical and current presence of organized white supremacy in West Michigan.
Yes.
We absolutely have to.
Yes.
In 1924, the Michigan Klan was 20,000 members long. These people were clergymen, city officials, teachers, business owners. They went on to have kids. This is our legacy.
Yes.
So the idea that the KKK was not a strong factor in the North, it was a Southern issue, right? No, this reinforces the misconception that Northern states don't deal with the same level of racial violence and discrimination as Southern states do. When we refuse to talk about these issues and acknowledge the truth, it's so easy for misconceptions about our history to be widely accepted. Next slide, please. So this, if you click this link, there's going to be a lot more information about this case, but Emmett Bolden versus the Grand Rapids Operating Company. It was a huge kind of turning point for the Black freedom struggle here in Grand Rapids. Basically, Emmett Bolden, he tried to go to the Keith Theater. He was told that he could only sit in the balcony and only buy those seats in the balcony. So he decided to sue the Grand Rapids Operating Company for discrimination. Now, this was back in the 1920s. Surprisingly enough, he lost his case. Right. So the NAACP decided to step in. They took this case to the Michigan Supreme Court and won. And this was actually one of the precedent cases for cases like the Brown versus Board of Education. This happened first. It happened in our community. So again, it was kind of a turning point for the Black freedom struggle here. But when you read up on this case, you'll see just how our local court systems, their purpose was to uphold the interests of businesses. And these same businesses that actively discriminated against Black Americans. So this brings me to my next point. Managerial racism. What is that? Oh my gosh. That one, make sure you check out the article that's linked up here. It's from Jeff Smith and Grid. Incredible piece. So as our community evolved, so did our racism. As Black Americans continue to challenge and fight for equity under the law, our lawmakers continue to find more creative and complex ways to manage these problems. So they did that by protecting the interests of businesses while politically pandering to the Black community for the Black vote with no real intention to create sustainable change or equity. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Still experiencing it. So here's how Todd Robinson, author of A City Within a City, describes managerial racism. So the managerial form of racism practiced by the Chamber of Commerce members and business politicians place whites in the role of patrons and Blacks as clients, designed to filter each racial issue. Managerial racism ultimately sought to locate a middle ground, as long as it was situated squarely on the interside of the race managers. Thus, the application of managerial racism relied on strict procedures designed to bog down racial change, while effectively presuming a position of compliance. Orderly Black progress could occur at a piecemeal rate so long as managers of race in the city approved and set the terms of agreement. So that's what West Michigandite means to me. Be compliant, don't make waves, don't even discuss racism, right? Because why would we want to discuss racism that's embedded into our pretty little Christian community? We were taught that the right way to reach equality is not through highly publicized legal action or publicized demonstrations, but through these race managers and their slow bureaucratic procedures. Next slide, please. So this book is called A City Within a City. It's honestly one of my favorite books I've ever read. Again, if you click the link and buy the book through my PDF, you'll be benefiting Reaching Beyond Bias. So this book, which details all of this historical evidence about the Black freedom struggle from about the late 1800s into like the 1970s, this book is actually in the process of becoming a documentary film. So next slide, please. I've been supporting Grandstand Pictures and their initiative of creating not only a documentary film about A City Within a City, but they're also working on a curriculum for schools based on this book. So please follow them. Please support any way that you can. I know they're still doing crowdfunding. They're still trying to get people to support events, but they are doing incredible and really important work because this book needs to be read by every single person that lives in Grand Rapids or the vicinity. Okay, so I'm gonna briefly touch on redlining. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this concept. Here is linked to a study by Bridge, Michigan, which is a nonpartisan news source. They released a report that was explaining how redlining from the 1930s impacts housing patterns today. So this report provides a very detailed account as to how the legacy of government sanctioned segregation remains today and how this segregation creates disparate outcomes in education throughout the state. So people believe that de jure segregation ended after the 1965 Civil Rights Act, right? After that, discrimination is illegal. But this legacy remains generations later. And neighborhoods that are segregated by race are also segregated by finance. So for decades, well, hundreds of years really, all white communities have been poured into financially, while the neighborhoods reserved for blacks and other undesirables, their language, not mine, have continued to suffer. Next slide, please. So there's a couple links here that explain the difference between de jure segregation and de facto segregation. So de jure, again, is that segregation that is mandated by law, by policy. De facto segregation is what they claim is natural migratory patterns, right? Because, yeah, of course, black people just want to live in all black neighborhoods, right? And white people would never abandon their communities because black families are moving in. Insane, just to gentrify the neighborhoods. Anyways, so many lawmakers and educators have led us to believe that this post-racial segregation that we deal with is that of fact and not that of law. And this couldn't be further from the truth. So this myth that we're dealing with de facto segregation and not segregation from policymakers, it basically just allows our local governments and our national governments to continue ignoring and continue perpetuating racial disparities with zero accountability. Yep. So segregation has always been state-sponsored. Next slide, please. So since housing is directly tied to education, it's very important for us to consider how this legacy of segregation has impacted and still impacts our educational system. So I read a study that explained that in 2004, schools were still as segregated as they were in 1954 before Brown versus Board of Education, right? So what you're looking at right here is data from a study by ProPublica about Grand Rapids Public Schools. So as you see, we are rated high on their segregation index. You also will see that black students in Grand Rapids Public Schools, on average, are 2.5 years behind their white counterparts academically, and they're 3 times more likely to be suspended. This system was designed this way on purpose. Yes, yes. So if we already know separate to be inherently unequal, then schools and neighborhoods that are segregated by race are also segregated in their quality of life. That's the reality. Next slide, please. So segregated housing creates segregated schools, both of which are root causes for areas like healthcare and employment, which we see vast racial disparities in as well. So next slide, please. It's no wonder that 2020 is looking a whole lot like 1967 these days. Yeah. But it's okay. Next slide. Because at least we painted really pretty murals about it. Now, I'm going to be West Michigan nice about this one because I definitely have some thoughts. But we are focusing on the problematic nature of nonprofits, specifically with this topic. Yes. So this project came from the aftermath of the 2020 riots, and it was sponsored by a nonprofit organization. And this project was problematic in many ways, but I'll just name a couple. First of all, one of the artist's murals, a black man, his art was mysteriously lost. And the organizers were completely disrespectful in their handling of that. In addition, other artists had their work painted over by building owners because their art was too controversial.
Wow.
Next slide, please. That's all I'm gonna say about that. So instead of addressing race and how it has shaped our community throughout history, many in West Michigan act like they are colorblind and unaffected by race. What a nice privilege that must be unaffected by race. So these next couple slides are full of a bunch of links. So definitely click around those if you want to do some extra reading. I will shamelessly plug the Diatribe right now. If you do not know who the Diatribe is, get to know. They are an incredible nonprofit organization led by BIPOC queer individuals, and they are tearing gentrification up right now with the 49507 project. So stay tuned with all the work that they're doing, and I'm not getting paid to say this, I promise. I just literally love them so much. The next slide, please. And again, these are just some books that I've put up there for suggested reading. Again, if you click any of those books and make a choice to purchase them, you will be supporting the Reaching Beyond Bias platform. So definitely thank you in advance for your support. So Grand Rapids has a racial past, just like every single other city in the United States of America. And just like every single city in the United States of America, we must reckon with this past. Our West Michigan niceness and failure to acknowledge this truth will only hinder our progress. We cannot afford to act as if our nice, quaint community has no place in the conversation of race and justice and equity in the United States. So we gotta talk about it.
Yes.
Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna leave you with this. You kind of stole my thunder on putting the poem at the end of the slide. You know, I'm gonna see if I can do one better. This is great. So this is a poem that I wrote. I ended up watching the George Floyd murder 2020, and this was a piece of a poem that I wrote as a reaction to this. So here it is. It's called 846. So what's up, y'all? What we gonna do with all this rage? Do we destroy ourselves, our own community, or stay in this cage? Do we riot? Do we scream? Do we wake up tomorrow and it was all a dream? Do we chant Black Lives Matter in the streets till our throats fucking bleed? What do we do when our lives are deemed worthless? When we fail to look at every Black person and see a purpose? When no matter what we do or say, we're still getting killed? And we're raising Black boys and girls to live in fear that they instilled. We're tired, exhausted, and angry beyond words, but welcome to America. How fucking absurd. Sometimes, sometimes I wonder if we should build a free Black nation, because I'm tired of repeating this damn conversation. So what if all lives mattered for real? If just for a second you'd imagine how it feels, if everyone would stop pretending and acting scared to address it, so that we can overcome it or become another history lesson. Thank you. Give it up again for Shane and
Again, be sure to check out the links. We will email the presentation to everyone here tonight and everyone watching on the live. Speaking of Diatribe, they come to my class every year. That's how I try to really connect our students with our community. And they come to my class every year to teach my students about mental health. Yeah. All right. Up next, we have Nico. Nico is a kind and unique 22-year-old from Benton Harbor. She is nurturing and protective and a dog lover. She's passionate about racial justice, police brutality, and LGBTQ rights. Nico will be performing poetry. I do want to say content advisory warning. Help me welcome Nico. So, if you were here last month, or if you streamed in with us last month, you got to hear Jalen. Jalen is for lack of better words, and I'm a teacher, so when I say this, I don't say it lightly, Jalen is brilliant. The political issues that are most dear to Jalen is global inequality, terrorism, and criminal justice. Jalen has always been politically engaged. He really didn't have a platform to express himself until he went to college at GDSU. Jalen was a part of a few student protest groups that focused on labor rights on a global scale. However, when he went to prison and saw the system in its true form and had to literally learn how to practice criminal constitution law in 6 months because no attorney would do right by him, and he was able to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. This is when he really saw that something needed to be done, an instrumental change that treats people as people in the system. Prince would describe Jalen full of knowledge and the potential to be something great. He tried to be there for the people that care about him the most. I'm not going to say too much about what Jalen is performing tonight, but just help me welcome Jalen.
Can you hear me? All right, so I'm gonna need all of you to do one thing. Close your beautiful eyes. And I say that because that's one of the favorite phrases my therapist likes to use when she speaks, and when it's like something like it was therapy, I guess. But it's to open yourself up to suggestion. To close your eyes means that through our eyes we see so much, and that's how we experience reality. And when you close your eyes, you can open your mind's eye. So I would like you all to do that and follow my voice. Because I want to take you on a journey through time, and a journey through the experience we call the middle passage. All right. I take you back to Africa after a village massacre. Survivors and scavengers hunted by human traffickers, black cargo shipment, middle passes passengers, frozen in panic in the ocean Atlantic, shackled and bred, forcibly transplanted, an underhanded one-way tour of the planet. The slave labor demanded. This is the birth of a nation, the perfected blueprints of a mason. No education in dehumanization. Capitalism is destructive creation. The The institution of slavery is heartless. Skin color makes you more than a target. Master's house is the heart of darkness. Whether she was your wife or your mother, he could rape her regardless. 9 months later, giving birth to another hostage. His sons and daughters bondage, being sold on an open market. Tortured and beaten by people who hate you for breathing, branded as heathens. The North Star was a beacon. Martyred for reading, searching for reason and hoping for freedom. Dodging alligators and bogs in the swamp. Booby traps that would chop your foot if you stomp. Being found by abolitionists and freedmen is like finding an angel in a legion of demons. Generational trauma from inhuman treatment. You could call it pathetic. I call it genetic. Imprinting a run with law enforcement's around. My ancestors did from slave catchers and hounds. Freedom in the North, the railroad was underground. Some passengers were lost. Some were never found. Victims of lynching in sundown towns. Reconstruction and social upheaval, followed by decades of separate but equal. Fighting lies that our minds were criminal and feeble. Only the persecuted have to wrestle with evil. Our legacy is 3/5 of a people, coexisting with a system that never made it illegal. The struggle continues. This is the story of what we have been through.
Sorry, my eyes are closed and I was thinking,
Give it up again for Jalen. Welcome, Nico. winner is 893056. Next is another artist from
Are you guys going to like really big applause for anybody who has beautiful? Ladies and gentlemen, Shane Edwards again. Just another line for the song. I can't sing, so you probably need to get some help. Are you guys ready? And stuff in my ways by the principle. Yes. I need peace so I can get it. God knows me to give us, all that had one plus five nights. Outcast, false thanks, I'm right. All that had one plus five nights. I'm God safe, but it seems that the lost night I need that urge to multiply. You and I desire, we don't divide, we don't decide, 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 our own kind of life, our own desires. Only God get it right. Only way that we get it right. You can't do it right. Just that I can't sunlight. I need that sunshine. Sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine. Sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine. Sunshine. I need that sunshine. Sunshine. Fine like Mark, but so like Malcolm. Yeah, stuck in the middle, so what's the outcome? Yeah. This generation, they say an outcome. We just give what you get, I mean, how come? What is the vibe without vision? What is the vibe without wisdom? My boss will my precision, don't need no like competition. My mind, I know what we're calling it a tribal tradition. I don't want to be good, I just want to be mentioned. Humans that are, and it's fingers off. My intelligence begins my activity starts at the stage. Nobody gonna tell my heart it can't break till I'm mentally tearing apart. But I want peace, and those who won't fold, and I'm gonna preach and hustle with their folks. Now I go beast, they go against the beast, or hold up on their feet. I need that. I need that sunshine, sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine, sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine, sunshine. Sunshine, sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine, sunshine. I need that sunshine, sunshine. Yeah, I need that sunshine, sunshine. I just dropped the T EP, so all the songs that you're gonna hear is all on that. Hope you guys are having fun. Ready? So this song is like really meaningful to me. This song is about my uncle and his best friend. They always told me not to be like them. I hustle many rocks on many blocks from out the top. If I get shot, I gotta lie and make a plot. Just find a job, ain't many ends meet. I sell beans to get bread, and now I got beat. On riding the streets is elusive, you don't rather than. Only slang to maintain to get mama change. I took a gun for protection. So if you want to threaten, I ain't rapping, but I do got a weapon just for discretion. And now my sister pregnant, hit with a son, hoping that he's the one, cause college gonna bring no funds. Besides scholarship. So I got a dip. I left school because it wouldn't bring a lot of chicks. So when I rap this book, I'm out of the cell. No more wishing you well, cause the hood can be hell. This is a story I tell, hoping you will prevail. It's either college or hell, or so they say. Don't be like me. Yeah, yeah. Don't be like me. Yeah, don't be like me. 1, 2, mic check. Don't be like me. Don't be like me. Celebration and inebriation is in the plan. Your uncle just got a scholarship. He's been the man. By the time you're 20, what I say is the least. Your uncle will get all the things, but a God is a beast. Now a beast. Gotta hit the store to get some liquor. And with my liver, so I can paint a vivid picture. I heard a shot around the block while listening to pop. Now I see the reply and I hit up on my block. But now, that's what the homies before we go out and drink. Mama don't trust my sheets, but my food's been elite. And when we hit the stove, they told me stay in the seat. By the time that I smoked 4 shots, now the oldest deceased. Now look, I'm not a thug in position of a description. The ones that called friends had lied and said I did it. So it was 5 days, now I'll stay in prison. I want this letter and send it to tell you, don't be like me. Yeah, yeah, don't be like me. Yeah, yeah, don't be like me. Don't be like me. Don't be like me. Can I have just one more round of applause for you beautiful people?
I should have. As we prepare for Maddie, let us have another draw. Oh, give it up again for Taylor. This piece is called Fatherhood. That's an interesting part. Janine here is a photographer, and she donated quite a few pieces for us for our auction. This one is just, when you see it up close, you'll fall. I fell in love with it. I hope my husband has the money to get. Winner is 893083. Hey! Up next, we have Maddie Butler. She is a board member of the Free People. She is in charge of our research department. She is a passionate advocate for BIPOC women and LGBTQ rights. She's a student at Michigan State University studying comparative cultures and politics and Spanish, with ambitions of going to law school to become a civil rights attorney. She is passionate about nonprofit work, especially if it has grassroots. She will be teaching us about the racist and colonial history of nonprofits. Give it up for Maddie.
I'm really nervous. This is a big act to follow. You guys. Thank you. So before I begin, I just wanted to say a couple of things. So Karina asked me to present on this topic. And going in, I had no idea what I was signing up for, but I knew that if she wanted me to talk about it, it was going to be a damn good topic. So what I'm going to be talking about is going to be all heavily influenced by white supremacy and racism, and I would feel incredibly disingenuous and hypocritical to frame this as me as a white person teaching all of you about these things. As I was researching this topic, I had to come to terms with a lot of ways that I was actually inadvertently perpetuating racism through my actions, and so I would like to reframe this as me sharing what I've learned, so that hopefully we can create a discussion going forward about the intersections of white supremacy and philanthropy so that we can work to dismantle the system. So in order to understand how nonprofits have gotten to the point where they are now, you have to go all the way back. For this discussion, I'm going to focus on the US only, but most other countries' histories with nonprofits is very similar. So we're going to start talking about the pre-Civil War white colonial culture where there was no formal philanthropy. If you had an issue, you turned to mutual care, which was getting care from the people within your network, within your community. This meant that it usually meant that only white women and children were the ones that were deemed worthy of aid, and created this basis of white patriarchal saviorism in care. So jumping forward a bit, the next big event was in the 1880s in the labor reform movement. During this time, people were striking, unionizing, protesting, along with more extreme actions like the bombing during the Haymarket riots in Chicago, all to get better working conditions in healthcare. These events inspired a man named Carnegie, I don't remember, sorry. He wrote a book called Gospel of Wealth, which is basically seen as the basis of modern philanthropy. He literally talks about, in this book, I read parts of it, it's just terrible, but he talks about how capitalism inherently creates inequality and exploitation, and this really exemplifies the idea of what philanthropy's true intent really is, which is to go and appease the masses just enough so that they go back to work and keep up the status quo so that the wealthy can continue to use them to grow their wealth. Right. This is another way that nonprofits are inherently racist because wealth accumulation in and of itself at that level is inherently racist. It's built on the exploitation of underprivileged people, which is visible through slavery, the exploitation of indigenous lands and genocide of indigenous people, and the exploitation of Asian immigrant labor in the railroad industry. So I bring up the railroad industry because there was this guy named Russell Sage, who built his fortune on the Transcontinental Railroad. And basically what this means is that he amassed massive amounts of wealth and land off the backs and blood of exploited labor, usually Asian immigrant labor. So then this guy dies, and his second wife inherits everything that he had and used it to found the first ever nonprofit foundation. So that means the first ever nonprofit in this country was built on exploited money. 6 years later, the U.S. government grants nonprofits tax exempt status, which is the creation of the nonprofit industrial complex. The term industrial complex is common in other contexts, but essentially it means a political system that bolsters our profit economy and capitalist society, and is when a business becomes intertwined with social or political systems. I knew the term industrial complex from the prison industrial complex or the military industrial complex, but I'd never ever heard of the nonprofit industrial complex. After 1913, the new tax exempt status in the nonprofit industrial complex was officially born, which did a couple of things. First, now governments can monitor and thus control social movements. Second, social movements began to be derailed by the new reliance of nonprofits on government and foundation funding. This introduced one of the most important ideas of nonprofit work. Nonprofits can never be more radical than their donors. Another quick thing that happened in 1913, income taxes started to get taxed. Income tax was established, sorry. So 1917 rolls around, and the U.S. government makes donations to nonprofits tax deductible. With this, wealthy citizens could minimize the amount of taxes they pay, which meant less money for social programs and the general people. Now, wealthy citizens, who were usually white citizens, could push their own personal agenda by donating to specific nonprofits, which essentially allows them to pick and choose who would receive help to solve problems that the wealthy had created through exploitation and oppression. Donors could keep the decision and social power of wealth without paying taxes. So again, nonprofits can never be more radical than their donors. If nonprofits did or tried to do anything that would harm white wealthy society, even if it was for the betterment of society as a whole, it would never survive. Another quick thing that happened in 1921 was grant-making institutions became tax exempt, but there was no laws about disbursement. So wealthy people could sink money into these institutions and hold it there to accrue interest without actually giving out very much in grants. So this is another example of nonprofits being created to benefit the white elite and more inequality and oppression, which then allowed wealthy to use nonprofits to line their pockets even more. Since this time, the institutions of nonprofits and the work to benefit the wealthy and further oppression hasn't gotten any better, especially since the 80s with the rise of neoliberalism and the tax cuts for the wealthy and spending cuts for social programs and all that good stuff. So that brings us to now. Where are we now? We can still see these racist and colonial roots that still permeate modern nonprofits. Leadership in nonprofits is incredibly white. One statistic I saw said that 2/3 of the population in New York is people of color, but 2/3 of the leadership of nonprofits in New York is white. This means that organizations who are white-led will insert themselves into communities of color to try and solve their problems by handing them money as long as the communities do as they're told. For nonprofit leaders nationwide, over 80% of all nonprofit leaders are white, and over 90% of leaders of the top 315 nonprofits are white. This means that in organizations, the white leaders disregard the people of color within their organization, even if the issues of the nonprofit is trying to address can only be fully understood and seen by BIPOC people. In many ways, this is just straight, enduring colonialism.
Yes.
So going forward, what can we do? How can we fix this? It's a big question. First of all, collectively, we need to be thinking of nonprofits and philanthropy as an economic and political system, as the nonprofit industrial complex. For the at least in part, systemic change to fundamentally change society? How can a nonprofit that is providing for the immediate issues of community work to abolish systemic oppression? Moreover, nonprofits need to be within the communities and listen to them in order to understand the complexities of the issues before taking action, instead of trying to impose themselves and their money in a community they aren't involved in.
That's right.
For white leaders and nonprofits, be prepared to step out of the way for BIPOC leaders to take your role. If this idea is difficult to swallow, think about why. For donors, be critical of where you're spending your money and time, and wherever possible, spend local instead of supporting outside colonizers. Donation is so easy nowadays that we can detach ourselves from thinking about how we as a society are still very much colonizers and very much colonized. To wrap up, I would just like to leave you all with a thought that has really intrigued me, because you all, by virtue of being here, are involved with the nonprofit. If you are working in or with or for a nonprofit, your goal and the goal of that organization should be to become useless in the future. You should be working yourself out of a job, because the goal of nonprofit work should be to dismantle the system that make nonprofit work necessary until there's nothing more that can be done. And if this isn't your goal, what is?
Give it up again for May. So, with Maddie at the head of our research, you can kind of tell why we're here. Hopefully, we'll have enough people register to vote so we can get those two into office in 2022. All right, let's do a drawing. This piece can be hung, I think, either way, although it's signed this way, so probably with this. 893067. Hey! All right, help me welcome Shane Young back to the stage.
Okay, before I start singing, I love you. Okay, before I sing this last song, I want to acknowledge the talent and the presenters. So, Jalen, Shayna, Nico, 616 Records, Carrie, Commissioner Womack, thank you so much for coming up here and just sharing this time. Yes, please. Research, time, and work went into those projects and presentations, so I just think it's very important to acknowledge all the hard work. So one more time, come on. Very quickly, I also want to talk about the word timing. It came up in my head while I heard everyone talk and stuff like that. Timing. Something brought us all here together for a reason, whatever reason that may be, whether you are presenting or coming to support a friend or you're here for the free samples, we're all here together. At the risk of sounding like a Hallmark card, the present truly is a gift. So I encourage everyone here, before you leave, talk to one person that you do not know, especially the presenters. I'm sure that they would love to hear your thoughts and just a moment to connect. In a pandemic, we were isolated. So I consider every gig, every show, every appearance, everything that I do, when I'm meeting someone and talking to someone, I really, truly want each other. Hey, you guys are awesome. Really, I'd like to connect with you guys. So the last song I have prepared is You Raise Me Up by Josh Groban, and yeah, let's give it a go.
And down and my soul so weary, when troubles come in my heart, and I am still waiting in the silence till you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up so I can walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I'm upon your shoulders. Raise me up more than I can
Thank you, Lily Tree Shelton and the WZZF 13 for hooking me up with that audition for American Idol. I really, truly appreciate it. And I appreciate every single person here and the people in the community that continue to believe in my voice, giving me a space to perform. So Karina, thank you.
Give it up again for Shin Yoon Nam. Keep the whole room. As we prepare for our final performance of the evening, let's have one more song. This one is signed up in the corner, so I believe it's to become like this. Winner, 893082. All right, for our final performance of the evening, give it up once again for 616 Records.
Everybody doing okay? Pretty smooth. Appreciate y'all for coming out, sharing your knowledge and your performances, your talents. I got the privilege to end the night off, so I hope I do right by you guys. Go ahead, start, folks. Hello, Brian. This is one of my songs off of my latest EP called Jukebox. This is just the intro. The song is called Saturday. This is basically just an intro of me into a new life of this hip hop world. So just bear with me as it starts through. Have a little smooth transition. But as we go through, if you feel the vibe, snap with me, vibe with me, keep me alive and stay. If you cool? Okay, I guess they want another one. Okay, I guess they want another one. Okay, I guess they want another one. Listen. Okay, I see they want another black on the track, spitting this crack, mixing with facts on the higher level, pushing the packs, perhaps pumping the shipping shack and keep me relaxed, and nothing keep me focused on this rumble, and keep my pockets stuffed like bruh. Nobody told you not to put up a gap. Look at the bigger picture with some roots in the back. Be like eating pipe and that pick the peppers. Yeah. So only pick and plot and moments, never wait to relapse. You milking it. Last line for my day one fans that know the shit. Back when I had it easy to resist to stay legit. Medicated plus the sip of defense. No plan it quick as every dream. Got a couple support who take your pictures. Y'all heard what they talk about, bro. Had the money, y'all got the VGR's new hero. Don't get it twisted, I'm at my green like yellow. I'm absolute, I only care how far from zero. Listen, making fools, sitting still, stuff be killing me. Every day it feel like I'm losing my energy. In the place where anyone can be the enemy. Vibe with me. I said, making fools, sitting still, stuff be killing me. Every day it feel like I'm losing my energy. In the place where anyone can be the enemy. Yo, let's rap. I said, listen, okay, I guess they want another one. Why with me? I said, I guess they want another one. Why with me? I said, I guess they want another one. I said, I guess they want another one. Okay, I see they want another one. Okay, I see they want another one. Okay, I see they want another one. But we don't get used to it. Listen, so as we go to this next song, the first song was Jukebox, but this next song called City Roots. This is a song from my last album dropped in 2018 by the name of Hindering Noise. So the noise that I grew up with, that kind of hindered me as I'm growing up, and at the same time, designed me to the man that I am today. Let's drop that. So right here, I feel like everybody can relate to this. Anybody corners of being in Michigan, not just being rapping, but we all share some type of common ground. So I want y'all really to vibe with me on this one. I'm gonna keep some fun with y'all, but at the same time, I want to keep this old school and new school vibe together. Let's get it. Okay. I said, love my city, Michigan baby. Love my city, Michigan baby. I said, love my city, Michigan baby. Listen, love my city, Michigan baby. Love my city, Michigan baby. Listen, love my city, Michigan baby. I said, love my city, Michigan baby. Listen, love my city. Watch out. Looking back, I used to stack up 50, looking for women, just a fitted jeans, got it, admit it, I was with it. Say you your mama, your auntie can get it bad, a little nigga. My slip is almost never a queen, but hey, the hoes did it, and the time chillin' in Market Square.
hood nigga, but still have my meanings with the man. Never my prayer as I move me a pen. Thankful for all the stuff that happened in my rearview mirror. Sorry, rolling on the bike to the hood, homie on the pen. So I had the war, moving deep, trying to get some bread. Watching others travel through these streets, it was shot dead. Other numbers slipping in the mix, caught up out of beds. Even had my fair scare of being gone, being some things off the belt shelf, broke into an empty home. Could have been a trap to a place to bring hoes along until we almost got put. Somebody left the stove or the burn half in the basement. In the crib for a week, can't afford no cases. Just sit back around that time, my trip was full of braces, raggedy shoelaces and missing tips. Try to do tricks on bikes that bust my lip. A good boy in the neighborhood that resorted to flip the script after game relation for homies and serious that got me hit. Penny go in the clip, that's a whole end up on the hip hop. Drug money, get flipped. Be cautious of who you with. Police patrol, we split. Well, not me, I'll be around for affiliation, but they can take me down. I need the moment, had to be school when I walk these streets. East side business, the OBL boys that question me. Like, who you, little nigga? What you on, little nigga? You in school, little nigga? That's what's up, little nigga. I got a face in this place in the city of interest, so love. But outside making from bacon to the lowest waiting, heartbreaking, waiting for forsaken, overtaken, engineers taking, breathbreaking, what they breathtaking, we need is revelation, Cause these are flaws in these words I say, but still I'm thankful because they made me who I am today. I said, love my city, love my city, Michigan made. I said, love my city, Michigan made. 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 I said, love my city, Michigan made. Love my city. I appreciate y'all. Once again. I appreciate all of y'all.
If you have your phone, please, or if you might know the song, open up the Black National Anthem. We're going to sing that as we close out. One more sing the first verse. Lift every voice and sing. Can you come up? To earth and heaven, ring with the harmony of deliverance. Can you teach them chorus up? Network, we have the building for a little bit longer. Network, so a lot of people you may not know. Next month is our Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's going to be an exciting event next month. So until then, have a great month, everyone. Bye.